Before you scroll past this story, let me ask you something that might change how you see the next 90 minutes of your life. Have you ever been so alone that even the walls around you stop pretending to hold you up? Have you ever stood in a place that used to mean something beautiful, something full of promise and hope, and watched it crumble around you piece by piece while wondering if you would crumble right along with it? Have you ever loved someone so completely that when they left this world, they took half of you with them and left the other half wandering in the dark, searching for a reason to keep breathing? If you have, then you already know Amanda. You know her better than she knows herself. And if you have not experienced that kind of loss, that kind of loneliness, that kind of desperate clinging to survival when everything inside you wants to let go, then stay with me. By the end of this story, you will understand why some doors have to fall completely apart before better ones can finally open. Now let me take you back to the summer of 1873, to a piece of land in the Western Territories so dry and unforgiving that it cracked under the summer sun like old leather left too long in the heat, to a cabin that had forgotten how to stand straight, forgotten how to shelter, forgotten every promise it had once made to the young couple who built it with their own hands and their own dream. And to a woman who refused to forget how to stand at all, even when her body begged her to lie down and never get up again. Amanda gripped the wooden plank with both hands and pressed it against the doorframe with all the strength she had left in her trembling arms. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her knees wanted to buckle beneath her weight. Sweat dripped down her forehead and stung her eyes, but she did not let go. She held on because holding on was the only thing she knew how to do anymore. It was the only skill she had left. The door had warped so badly over the past winter that it no longer fit the frame her husband had built for it. One corner bowed inward like it was ashamed of itself. Another corner leaned away from the frame like it wanted to escape from its own existence. The whole thing hung crooked on rusted hinges that groaned every time the wind blew, letting in dust and heat during the day and cold and darkness at night. She was 21 years old, just 21. But the small mirror by the wash basin had stopped agreeing with her age months ago. When she looked at her reflection now, she saw someone older, someone worn down by grief and sickness and loneliness. Illness had thinned her face until her cheekbones stood out sharp beneath her skin. It had hollowed the soft places beneath her eyes and turned them into dark shadows that never went away no matter how much she slept. And widowhood had done the rest, adding lines around her mouth that should not have appeared for another 20 years. Her husband Daniel had built this cabin with his own two hands. He had cut the trees himself, hauled them back on a wagon he had borrowed from a neighbor, stripped the bark, and shaped them into beams with nothing but an axe and endless determination. He had hammered every nail. He had fitted every board. He had stood right here on this very porch, his shirt soaked with sweat and his face bright with pride, and told her they would grow old together in this place. "We will raise our children here, Mandy," he had said, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "We will watch them run through those fields. We will sit on this porch when we are old and gray and remember how hard we worked to build something that would last." That was 2 years ago, 2 years that felt like 2 centuries. Now Daniel was buried beneath a simple wooden cross on the hill behind the house. The fever had taken him in the dead of winter, when the ground was frozen so hard she had to build fires on top of it just to soften the earth enough to dig. Quick and cruel, the way fever always was in these parts where doctors were scarce and medicine was scarcer. One week he was laughing and planning their spring planting, talking about the seeds he would order from the catalog, the vegetables they would grow, the life they would build together. The next week she was kneeling beside his bed, holding his hand. It grew colder and colder, watching the light fade from his eyes while snow piled up against the windows and the wind howled like it was mourning along with her. She had buried him alone. Not a single person from town had offered to help. Not the shopkeeper who smiled at her when she bought flour. Not the minister who had married them. Not the women who nodded politely when she passed them on the street. They had all stayed in their warm homes with their living husbands and their comfortable lives, and they had let her dig that grave by herself in frozen ground that fought her every inch of the way. She had never forgotten that. She never would. Amanda pushed the plank harder against the doorframe, her arms shaking with the effort. If she could just get it to stay in place long enough to hammer a nail through it, Maybe the door would hold for another few weeks. Maybe she could make it through the summer. Maybe she could figure out what to do next before winter came again and finished what the last one had started. A nail popped loose from the rotting wood and fell into the dirt at her feet. She stared at it for a long moment, breathing hard, fighting back the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. Then she bent to pick it up, because every nail was precious when you had nothing. The world tilted as she reached down. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision like flies circling a carcass. She grabbed the door frame to keep from falling and stood very still, eyes closed, waiting for the dizziness to pass. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. The sickness had come 3 months after Daniel died, as if losing him had not been punishment enough. First, there was a cough that would not quit, no matter how much honey tea she drank or how many nights she spent propped up on pillows trying to breathe. Then came the weakness that settled into her bones like winter cold and refused to leave no matter how much she rested. The doctor in town, the one who charged $2 for a visit she could not afford, had looked at her with pity in his eyes and told her she needed rest and good food and someone to care for her. He had said it kindly, as if he did not realize he was listing 3 things that were as impossible for her to obtain as the moon and stars. She had none of those things. She had no rest because the cabin needed constant repairs just to remain standing. She had no good food because her garden grew more weeds than vegetables, and the money Daniel had saved was almost gone. And she had no one to care for her because the people of this town had made it very clear that a young widow living alone was not their concern. What she had was this cabin. This broken, sagging, falling apart cabin that leaked when it rained and let in cold when it did not. She had a small plot of land that had produced nothing but disappointment for 2 growing seasons. She had a well that sometimes gave water and sometimes gave mud, depending on its mood. And she had her pride. Her pride was a stubborn, fierce thing that burned in her chest like a small flame that refused to go out. It was the only thing keeping her alive. The only thing that made her get out of bed each morning when staying there forever would have been so much easier. The sound of hooves reached her ears, slow and steady and deliberate, not the frantic gallop of someone bringing bad news or fleeing from danger, not the casual trot of a neighbor passing by on their way to somewhere else, something in between, something purposeful. Amanda straightened and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She turned toward the road that ran past her property, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and watched as a rider approached. Dust curled around the horse's legs like a warning, rising into the hot air and hanging there. She did not step back inside the cabin to hide. She did not run around to the back of the house where she could not be seen. She stood right where she was with the plank still in her hands and sweat darkening the collar of her faded dress, because she would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her run. She had run from nothing and no one since Daniel died, and she was not about to start now. The rider came closer, resolving from a distant shape into a man with straight shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who did not believe in soft edges. His clothes were practical and well-maintained. His posture was military straight, the kind that spoke of discipline and training. And the badge pinned to his chest caught the afternoon sunlight and flashed like a small fire. A lawman. Of all the people who could have come riding up to her broken cabin on this particular afternoon, it had to be a lawman. Amanda felt her stomach tighten into a hard knot. Lawmen meant trouble. They meant questions she did not want to answer and judgments she did not want to hear. They meant someone in town had been talking about her again, spreading gossip and speculation about the young widow who lived alone and refused to accept her proper place in the world. The man reined in his horse about 10 yards from where she stood and sat there for a moment looking at the cabin. His eyes moved slowly and methodically, the way a man might survey a battlefield before deciding on his strategy. He looked at the roof that sagged in the middle like a tired horse. He looked at the window on the left that would not open and the window on the right that would not close. He looked at the crooked door that hung off its hinges like a broken arm. Then he looked at her. His gaze was assessing, practical, and entirely without softness. He was not looking at her the way men sometimes looked at women, with interest or desire or even pity. He was looking at her the way a doctor might look at a patient, cataloging symptoms, making calculations. He dismounted with easy grace, a man who had spent most of his life on horseback, and tied his horse to the fence post that marked the edge of her property. The post leaned almost as badly as the door did, and for a moment Amanda felt a strange kinship with it. They were both barely holding on. The man walked toward her, his boots crunching on the dry, cracked earth. He stopped about 5 feet away, close enough to talk without shouting, but far enough to maintain a proper distance. "That place is not fit for living," he said. His voice was flat and matter-of-fact, like he was reading from a report or stating an obvious truth that required no emotion. "The sky is blue. Water is wet. That cabin is going to kill you." Amanda stiffened. Her fingers tightened around the plank until her knuckles turned white. She did not answer. She did not trust herself to speak without saying something she would regret. The man seemed unbothered by her silence. He continued as if she had responded. "You should not be here alone. The roof will give in before winter comes. That center beam is rotted through. I could see it from the road. And the door." He nodded at the crooked thing behind her. "That door has already given up. Whatever you are trying to do with that plank is not going to hold it." Amanda lifted her chin. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away, refusing to show the fear and exhaustion that churned inside her. "I am managing," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, and she was grateful for small mercies. The lawman let out a short breath through his nose. It was more impatience than anger, the sound of a man who dealt with stubborn people every day and had lost his patience for it years ago. "Managing is not the same as surviving," he said, "and you look sick. When was the last time you ate a proper meal? When was the last time you slept through the night without coughing yourself awake?" The words landed harder than the plank ever could have. She felt them in her chest, in the way her breath shortened, in the way her heart stumbled over its next beat. He had seen too much. He knew too much. And she hated him for it. "I did not ask for your opinion," she said, quiet but firm. "You can take your observations and your badge and your horse and ride right back to wherever you came from." For a long moment, the lawman just looked at her. Something shifted in his eyes, something she could not quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition, like he was seeing something in her that he had not expected to find. "I came to town for supplies," he said, his voice slightly less hard than before. "Not to argue with stubborn women who are determined to die in falling down cabins. But I would be failing my duty if I rode away and left you here like this." He paused, seemed to consider his next words carefully. "Come with me. I have a place about 3 miles west of here. Solid roof, walls that do not lean, a door that actually closes. You can have a bed and meals until you decide what to do next." Amanda laughed. The sound surprised her. It was sharp and brittle, like glass breaking, and it scraped against her throat on the way out. "Charity does not suit me," she said. "Never has. Never will. This is not charity." The lawman's voice was patient now, like he was explaining something simple to someone who refused to understand. "This is sense, common sense, the kind of sense that keeps people alive when they are too proud to keep themselves alive." She shook her head. "No." The word hung between them, final and absolute. Amanda watched the lawman's jaw tighten, watched the muscle in his cheek flex as he clenched his teeth. He wanted to argue. She could see it in every line of his body, but he held back. "My name is Brent," he said instead. "Brent Walker. I am stationed about 3 miles from here. Like I said, if you change your mind, if that door falls or that roof caves in or you wake up one morning and realize you cannot do this alone anymore, the offer stands. My door will be open." He turned and walked back to his horse, mounted with the same easy grace he had shown before, and gathered the reins in his hands. "I hope you are as strong as you think you are," he said, looking down at her from the saddle. "Because if you are not, this place will be your grave, and that would be a waste." Then he turned his horse and rode away. The dust rose behind him in a cloud that slowly settled back to the earth. The sound of hooves faded until there was nothing left but silence. Amanda's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cabin step, the plank falling across her knees, her whole body shaking. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded, and something inside her that she had kept locked away for months, something raw and frightened and desperate, was threatening to break free. She would not cry. She never cried. Crying was for people who had someone to comfort them afterward, someone to hold them and tell them everything would be all right. She had no one. She had nothing but this broken cabin and her stubborn pride and her determination to survive. By nightfall, the door finally fell inward. It came loose from its hinges with a sound like a gunshot, crashing to the floor of the cabin and sending up a cloud of dust that made her cough until her ribs ached. Amanda stood in the open doorway, looking at the dark sky beyond her on Watson, feeling the cold evening wind rush past her into the cabin like it owned the place. She picked up her shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then she stood there for a long time, uncertain whether she was preparing to stay or preparing to leave, while the stars came out one by one and the coyotes began to howl somewhere in the darkness. Morning came without ceremony, without fanfare, without any of the hope that mornings are supposed to bring. Just a pale wash of gray light that slipped through the broken window and the open doorway, settling on the dusty floor like a question Amanda did not want to answer. She woke stiff and aching in every joint, her back screaming from sleeping, curled up in the corner of the cabin, with only a thin blanket between her and the hard wooden floor. Her throat was raw and dry, like she had swallowed sand during the night. Her chest was tight, each breath requiring more effort than it should, and the worries from the night before still clung to her skin like cobwebs she could not brush away. She had not slept well. Every sound had jerked her awake. The scurrying of mice in the walls, the distant howl of coyotes, the creaking of the cabin as it settled and shifted, as if it too was struggling to hold itself together for one more night. And always, always the cold wind blowing through the open doorway where the door used to be. Amanda sat up slowly, every muscle protesting the movement. She looked at the door lying flat on the floor where it had fallen, a broken thing that had finally given up its fight. Like so much else in her life, it had held on as long as it could and then simply let go. She understood the feeling. Outside, the land waited, patient and indifferent and eternal. It did not care whether she lived or died. It had watched 1,000 people struggle and fail on this unforgiving soil, and it would watch 1,000 more. Their dreams, their hopes, their desperate efforts to carve out a life in this wilderness meant nothing to the land. It simply endured while they came and went like seasons. Amanda forced herself to stand. Her head spun for a moment, the world tilting dangerously. But she grabbed the wall and held on until the dizziness passed. Then she walked on unsteady legs to the wash basin in the corner. The water inside had grown a thin film of dust overnight, blown in through all the gaps and cracks in the walls. She splashed it on her face anyway, welcoming the cold shock, using it to push away the fog in her head and the exhaustion in her bones. The water smelled faintly of iron, like blood, and she tried not to think about what that meant. She boiled more water over the small fire pit outside, feeding the flames with scraps of wood she had collected from the broken fence. The water took forever to heat, and when she finally drank it, it tasted of rust and smoke and desperation. But she drank it carefully, slowly, as if it might run out simply because she needed it. Everything ran out eventually. That was the one lesson life had taught her with perfect clarity. She ate a piece of hard bread that was 3 days old and would probably break a tooth if she was not careful. She soaked it in the water to soften it, then chewed slowly, making the small meal last as long as possible. Her stomach growled, demanding more, but there was nothing more to give it. The pantry was nearly empty. The garden had produced almost nothing, and the money Daniel had saved, the small pile of coins he had kept in a tin box under the floorboards, was down to its last few dollars. After her meager breakfast, Amanda walked back to the doorway and looked at the plank she had been trying to use yesterday. It lay in the dirt where she had dropped it, useless now. The nail she had picked up was still in her pocket, a habit born of scarcity that she could not break. Every small thing had value when you had nothing. She could try again. She could drag the door upright and lean it against the frame, wedge it in place with rocks and boards, create some barrier against the wind and the animals and the endless dust. She had done similar repairs a dozen times over the past year, patching and mending and holding things together with little more than stubbornness and prayer. But as she stood there looking at the fallen door and the crooked frame in the cabin that seemed to lean more with each passing day, something inside her shifted. A small crack formed in the wall she had built around her heart, and through that crack seeped a terrible, terrifying thought. What if Brent was right? What if this place really was nothing but a grave waiting for patience? She pushed the thought away immediately, angry at herself for even allowing it to form. This cabin was all she had left of Daniel. These walls, rotting as they were, had heard his laughter. This floor, dusty and warped as it was, had felt his footsteps. This was where he had kissed her on their wedding night, where he had held her when she cried, where he had promised her a future that death had stolen before it could begin. Leaving this place would mean leaving him, and she was not ready for that. She would never be ready for that. But staying meant dying, slowly, painfully, alone. The lawman had seen it. She had seen it too, in her more honest moments, the moments she usually pushed aside in favor of blind determination. The sickness returned around midday, as it always did. It came in waves, rising and falling like a tide. Some hours she felt almost normal, almost like her old self, and she used those hours to work as hard and fast as she could. Other hours she could barely stand, could barely breathe, and all she could do was sit and wait for the weakness to pass. Today was a bad day. The waves came stronger and more frequent than usual. She managed to stack some stones near the threshold, creating a small barrier to keep out the worst of the wind. She managed to sweep some of the grit from the floor, pushing it out into the yard where it belonged. But every task left her more exhausted than the last. When her knees finally buckled, she did not fight it. She just sank down onto the cabin step and sat there, breathing hard, waiting for the world to stop spinning. The sun beat down on her head without mercy. Sweat soaked through her dress, and the fear she had been holding at bay for months started to creep closer. She was dying. Not today, probably not tomorrow, but soon. The sickness was winning. Her body was giving up, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The sound of hooves reached her ears around 2 in the afternoon. The same slow, deliberate rhythm as yesterday. The same unhurried approach of someone who knew where they were going and why. Amanda's heart sank even as something else, something she refused to name, lifted slightly in her chest. She forced herself to stand, forced herself to face the road, forced herself to look like someone who had everything under control. Brent rode into view and stopped at the fence just as he had the day before. His horse was the same, a sturdy brown gelding with intelligent eyes. His clothes were the same, his expression was the same, but this time when he looked at the cabin, she saw something different in his face, something that might have been sadness. He dismounted without waiting for invitation and tied his horse to the leaning fence post. Then he walked past her without speaking and stood in the doorway, looking at the door that now lay flat on the floor. He exhaled through his nose, a sound of resignation rather than surprise. "I told you," he said. Amanda bristled. "You told me many things." He did not respond to that. Instead, he stepped over the fallen door and into the cabin, examining the walls, the ceiling, the floor. He moved with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for and was not happy about finding it. "The center beam is cracked," he said, pointing up at the ceiling. "Has been for a while from the look of it. One good storm and this whole roof comes down. The floor over there," he gestured toward the far corner, "is rotted through. Step on it wrong and your foot goes right through to the ground. And these walls," he ran his hand along the nearest one, and his fingers came away gray with dust and rot. "These walls are not keeping anything out anymore." Amanda stood in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, trying to look defiant, trying to look strong, trying to look like anything other than what she was, exhausted, sick, and afraid. "I know the problems," she said. "I have been living with them." Brent turned to face her. The afternoon light fell across his features, highlighting the hard lines of his jaw, the slight creases around his eyes, the mouth that seemed unused to smiling. "Living with them," he repeated. "Is that what you call this? It is my home." "It was your home," he corrected, not unkindly. "Now it is a death trap, and you know it." The words hurt because they were true. Amanda felt tears prick at the backs of her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. She would not cry. She would not give him that satisfaction. "What do you want from me?" she demanded. "Why do you keep coming back here? What difference does it make to you whether I live or die in this cabin?" Brent was quiet for a long moment. He stepped back over the fallen door and came to stand in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. "My name is Brent Walker," he said again, as if the repetition might help her understand. "I have worn this badge for 12 years. I have done things I am not proud of and things I am. I have watched good people die because I got there too late, and bad people live because I could not prove what they had done. And through all of it, through every year of keeping the peace and enforcing the law, I have learned one thing that matters more than all the rest." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "I learned that doing the right thing is rarely easy, but doing the wrong thing, or doing nothing at all, that has a cost too. A cost that adds up over time until you cannot carry it anymore." He looked back at the cabin, at the fallen door, at all the evidence of a life falling apart. "Leaving you here would be wrong," he said simply. "I know it. You know it. And I cannot ride away and pretend otherwise just because you are too stubborn to admit you need help." Amanda opened her mouth to argue, to protest, to insist that she did not need anyone's help, that she was managing just fine, that she would figure something out the way she always did. But the words would not come, because they were lies and she was too tired to keep lying. Her shoulders sagged, the fight drained out of her like water from a cracked jug. She looked at the cabin that had been her prison and her refuge for the past year, and she finally allowed herself to see it for what it really was. A grave waiting for patience. That was what Brent had called it, and he was right. "If I come with you," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "what happens then?" "Then you have a roof over your head that will not fall on you," Brent said. "You have food to eat and water to drink and a bed to sleep in. You have time to rest and heal and figure out what you want to do next. And what do you get out of it?" He considered the question. "The peace of knowing I did the right thing, that is all. That is enough." Amanda looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the lie, the hidden motive, the trap. Men did not help women without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson the hard way after Daniel died, when offers of assistance always came with strings attached. But Brent's face gave nothing away. His eyes were steady and clear. His posture was relaxed but attentive. He looked like a man who had said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. "I will not owe you anything?" she asked. "Nothing. And I can leave whenever I want. Whenever you want." She stood there for a long time, the wind blowing around them, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. Everything she knew, everything she had built her identity around since Daniel died, screamed at her to refuse, to stay, to keep fighting alone. But there was another voice now, smaller and quieter but impossible to ignore. A voice that said maybe being strong did not mean dying alone. Maybe accepting help was not the same as admitting defeat. She thought of Daniel, of the man who had loved her, of what he would say if he could see her now, slowly killing herself in the ruins of their dream. He would be angry. He would be heartbroken. He would tell her to get out, to save herself, to live the life he could not live with her. And he would be right. Amanda took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and made her choice. "All right," she said, "I will come with you." Brent nodded once as if he had expected nothing less, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been relief. "Do you need to gather anything?" She looked back at the cabin, at the life she was leaving behind, at the memories that would always live there, whether she did or not. "Yes," she said, "give me a few minutes." She stepped over the fallen door and walked through the cabin one last time, her fingers trailing along the walls, her feet knowing every creak and groan of the floor. She gathered her few possessions, a dress that had belonged to her mother, worn soft with age, a small book of poems Daniel had given her on their wedding day, his knife, the one he had used to carve their initials into the doorframe back when the doorframe was still worth carving into. She paused at the initials, D and A, surrounded by a heart, already fading, already being reclaimed by the rot and the weather. "I love you," she whispered. "I will always love you. But I have to go now. I have to live." She pressed her fingers to the carved letters one last time. Then she turned and walked out of the cabin without looking back. Brent was waiting by his horse. He took her bundle without comment and secured it to his saddle with practiced efficiency. When he offered his hand to help her mount, she hesitated for just a moment. Then she took it. The ride to Brent's place took about an hour, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. Longer because every minute on horseback made Amanda's weakened body ache in new places. Shorter because her mind was so full of thoughts and fears and questions that time seemed to collapse in on itself. She sat behind Brent on the horse, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist for balance, trying not to lean against him too much, trying to maintain some distance even in this forced proximity. The land rolled by on either side of them, green and gold in the summer light, endless and indifferent. Brent did not speak during the ride. He seemed comfortable with silence in a way that Amanda found both soothing and unsettling. Most people filled silence with chatter, with nervous conversation, with anything to avoid the awkwardness of saying nothing. But Brent simply rode, his back straight, his hands steady on the reins, as if silence was just another tool he had mastered. Amanda used the quiet to think, to worry, to second-guess every decision that had led her to this moment. What was she doing? Riding off with a man she had met only yesterday? A man she knew almost nothing about except that he wore a badge and lived alone 3 miles outside of town. For all she knew, he could be leading her somewhere terrible. For all she knew, his offer of help was just a prettier version of all the other offers she had refused. But something in her gut told her otherwise. Something in the way he had looked at her, not with hunger or pity, but with a kind of resigned recognition, like he had seen people in her position before and knew exactly what they needed even when they did not know themselves. The house appeared gradually, first as a shape on the horizon, then as a structure with distinct features. It sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by open land, with a small barn to one side and a well to the other. As they got closer, Amanda could see that it was not large or fancy. The walls were plain wood, unpainted but well-maintained. The roof was simple tin that gleamed dully in the afternoon sun. The porch had no railing, just a few steps leading up to a solid front door. But it was straight. Every line of it was straight and true, from the foundation to the roof line. The walls did not lean. The windows sat square in their frames. The door, when Brent pushed it open, swung smoothly on hinges that did not creak. Amanda stood on the porch for a moment, just looking. After a year of watching her cabin slowly fall apart around her, the simple fact of a house that stood straight felt like a miracle. "It is not much," Brent said, mistaking her silence for disappointment. "But it is solid. I built it myself about 5 years ago. Every beam, every board. I wanted something that would last." She turned to look at him. "You built this yourself?" He nodded. "Took me the better part of a year. Cut the trees myself from that stand over there." He pointed to a grove of oaks about half a mile away. "Hauled them back on a wagon, shaped them with an axe and a saw. It was hard work, but I wanted to do it right." "You did," Amanda said softly. "You did it right." Something flickered across his face, there and gone too fast to identify. Then he stepped past her into the house. "Room is at the end of the hall," he said. "All business again. Bed is made. Water is in the pitcher. The outhouse is around back, about 50 yards. You will see the path." He did not give her a tour, did not fuss over her or hover or ask if she needed anything. He just pointed her in the right direction and stepped aside. Amanda walked through the front door and stopped just inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. The house smelled like wood smoke and coffee and something else. Something clean and masculine that she could not quite identify. The floors were swept clean. A table sat in the main room with 2 chairs pushed neatly under it, and a wood stove stood in the corner with a pot already warming on top. She had expected something cold, something hard and spare like the man who owned it. Instead, she found something careful, neat, maintained by hands that understood the value of things that worked properly and were willing to put in the effort to keep them that way. The room at the end of the hall was small but clean. A narrow bed with a wool blanket folded at the foot, a washstand with a ceramic basin and a matching pitcher full of fresh water. A single window that looked out over the back field, letting in soft afternoon light. Nothing more and nothing less than what she needed. Amanda set her bundle on the bed and stood there for a long moment, not moving, barely breathing. The silence in this house was different from the silence in her cabin. Her cabin's silence had been empty, hollow, like the absence of something that should have been there. This silence was full, peaceful, like the presence of something that chose to be quiet. She heard Brent moving in the other room. The clink of a pot being set on the stove, the scrape of a chair being pulled out, the soft sounds of a man going about his daily routine. Ordinary sounds, domestic sounds, the sounds of a life being lived, however simply. Something broke inside her then. Not dramatically, not with tears or sobs or any outward sign, just a quiet internal shifting, like ice cracking on a river at the start of spring. She sat down on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and let herself shake. Not from illness this time, not from cold, not from fear, just from the sheer overwhelming relief of finally being somewhere safe. She did not cry. She still would not cry. But she came closer than she had in months. When she emerged from the room about an hour later, she had washed her face and smoothed her hair and done what she could to make herself presentable. Brent was sitting at the table with a ledger open in front of him, though he did not seem to be reading it. He looked up when she appeared, his expression neutral but attentive. "Food is on the stove," he said. "Eat when you are ready." Amanda looked at the pun, then at the table, then at him. The question that had been building inside her since they left the cabin finally found its way to her lips. "Why are you doing this?" He considered the question like it deserved real thought, like it was not just something to dismiss with an easy answer. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong," he said finally, "and I have done enough wrong things in my life. I am trying to do better." She did not know how to respond to that. It was not the answer she had expected. Not charity, not duty, not some hidden agenda, just a man trying to be better than he had been. She ladled soup into a bowl and sat down across from him at the table. The soup was simple but good, beans and salt pork and vegetables that had actually been seasoned. Real food, hot food, the kind of food she had not tasted in longer than she wanted to admit. She ate in silence and he let her. He did not watch her, did not hover, did not make her feel like a guest or a burden. He just went back to his ledger, or at least pretended to, and let her eat in peace. When she finished, he took her bowl without asking and set it in the wash basin. "Sleep," he said. "We will talk more tomorrow." She wanted to argue, wanted to establish rules and boundaries, wanted to make clear that she was not his charity case and would not be treated as such. But her body was failing her. The ride had taken more out of her than she realized. The food had made her drowsy, and the bed in the other room was calling to her with a voice she could not resist. She went to her room. She closed the door. She lay down on the bed without undressing. And for the first time since Daniel died, she slept through the night without waking. She slept without dreams, without nightmares, without the endless replay of grief and fear that had haunted her nights for over a year. She slept like someone who finally felt safe. Morning found her disoriented. The ceiling above her was wrong. The light coming through the window was wrong. The sounds were wrong. No wind whistling through gaps in the walls. No creaking of a cabin trying to hold itself together. She sat up fast, heart pounding, before she remembered where she was. Brent's house. The lawman's house. The house that held. She rose slowly and smoothed her wrinkled dress, feeling embarrassed that she had slept in her clothes like a vagrant. Her reflection in the window glass looked better than it had in weeks. Or maybe that was just the light. Or maybe it was something else. Something she was not ready to examine too closely. When she opened the door, she found breakfast waiting on the table. Coffee in a tin cup, still steaming. Eggs on a plate, cooked with what looked like actual butter. Bread that was fresh enough to still be soft, sliced thick and ready for eating. Brent was nowhere to be seen. She could hear him outside, the rhythmic sound of a hammer striking wood. Building or fixing, she could not tell. But the sound was steady and sure. The sound of competent hands doing necessary work. She ate alone. The quiet did not feel lonely this time. It felt like permission. Permission to rest. Permission to recover. Permission to simply exist without having to justify her existence. After breakfast, she washed the dishes without being asked. Then she swept the floor because it needed it, though only slightly. Then she straightened the chairs because they were marginally crooked, adjusting them until they sat perfectly aligned with the table. Small tasks, unnecessary tasks. But they gave her something to, and doing gave her a sense of purpose. By the time Brent came inside, the house looked subtly different. Not better exactly, just tended, cared for. He noticed. She could tell by the way his eyes moved around the room, cataloging the small changes, but he did not comment on them. "You should rest," he said instead. "I have rested enough." He studied her for a moment, that same assessing look from before. Then he nodded. "There is mending in the basket by the stove," he said. "If you need something for your hands." It was not a command, it was an offering. Something to do that would not tax her body. Something to contribute without being asked to sacrifice. A way to be useful without being used. Amanda found the basket. Inside were shirts with torn seams, socks with holes that needed darning, a pair of work trousers that had been patched so many times they were more patch than trouser. She sat by the window where the light was good and started to work. Her hands remembered the motions even when her mind wandered. In and out with the needle. Pull tight. Knot and cut. The rhythm was soothing, repetitive, almost meditative. It grounded her in the present moment and kept her mind from spiraling into the past. Brent worked outside until noon, then came in and made lunch without asking if she was hungry. They ate together in a silence that was starting to feel less like absence and more like understanding. Two people who did not need words to fill every moment. Two people who were learning each other's rhythms. After lunch, he rode into town for supplies. Amanda stayed behind. She was not ready to face the town yet, not ready to see the faces of people who had watched her struggle and done nothing to help. She explored the house more thoroughly while he was gone, found the pantry stocked with dry goods, beans and flour and sugar and salt, found the woodpile neat and full, split logs stacked in precise rows, found the well close and clean, the water clear and sweet when she drew some up to taste. Everything here worked. Everything here held. When Brent returned that evening, she was sitting on the porch. She did not know why she was there, only that she had felt drawn to the open air, to the view of the land stretching away in all directions. He dismounted and unloaded his saddlebags without speaking, carrying supplies into the house with efficient movements. When he was done, he came back out and stood near the porch, not quite on it, like he was waiting for permission. "You look better," he said. "I feel better," she replied. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she meant it. A week passed in quiet rhythms, each day blending into the next with the gentle predictability of water finding its level. Amanda woke each morning before dawn, drawn from sleep by habit rather than necessity. She would lie still for a few moments, listening to the house settle around her, reminding herself where she was and how she had gotten there. Then she would rise, dress in the dim light, and start the coffee. Brent never asked her to cook for him, never expected her to clean his house or wash his clothes or do any of the domestic tasks that women were supposed to do in exchange for room and board. But she did them anyway because doing gave her purpose, and purpose was something she had been missing for far too long. She cleaned because cleaning was something she could control when so much else was beyond her power. She cooked because cooking was a skill she had nearly forgotten, and rediscovering it felt like rediscovering a piece of herself. She mended and swept and tended because these small acts of care were the only way she knew to say thank you without actually having to say the words. Her strength returned in small increments, so gradual at first that she barely noticed. The trembling in her hands steadied. The shadows under her eyes faded from dark purple to light gray. She could walk to the well and back without needing to stop and catch her breath. She could stand at the stove for an hour without her knees threatening to give out beneath her. The sickness was not gone. She knew that with a certainty that lived in her bone. It lurked beneath the surface, patient and watchful, waiting for weakness, ready to pounce the moment she let her guard down. But it was quieter now, less insistent, and for that reprieve, however temporary, she was grateful. On the 8th day, everything changed. Amanda was behind the house, hanging laundry on the line Brent had strung between two posts. The work was simple but satisfying, the wet cloth growing lighter in her hands as she pinned it up to dry, the clean smell of soap and sunshine filling her lungs. She was humming softly to herself, a song her mother used to sing when she heard the sound of wheels on the road. She straightened and shaded her eyes against the morning sun, watching as a wagon approached. It was not Brent. The horse was different, lighter in color, and the wagon was nicer than anything a lawman could afford on his salary. Painted wood, metal fittings. the kind of wagon that announced its owner's wealth before they ever opened their mouth. A woman sat on the bench, holding the reins with gloved hands. Her back was rigid, her chin lifted, her posture radiating the kind of superiority that came from money and social position. She wore a blue dress with white lace trim at the collar and cuffs, the fabric too fine for a simple trip to the country. Her hair was pinned beneath a hat that probably cost more than everything Amanda owned put together. The wagon stopped at the fence line. The woman did not climb down. She just sat there, looking at Amanda with eyes that were already measuring, already judging, already finding her wanting. "So it is true," the woman said. Her voice carried easily across the distance between them, clear and sharp as a blade. "The lawman has taken in a stray." Amanda felt her spine stiffen. Her hands, still holding a wet shirt, tightened until her knuckles went white. But she did not respond. She had learned long ago that some people were not worth the energy of an argument. The woman's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. None at all. "I am Martha Collins." She pronounced the name like it was supposed to mean something. "My husband owns the general store in town. The bank too. I expect you have heard of us." Amanda had not heard of them. In the years since Daniel's death, she had avoided town as much as possible, going only when she absolutely needed supplies and leaving as quickly as she could manage. She knew almost no one, and that was exactly how she preferred it. But Martha Collins clearly expected recognition, expected deference, expected Amanda to be impressed and intimidated by her name and position. When neither of those things happened, something ugly flickered in her eyes. "They are saying you were living in that old cabin on the East Road," Martha continued, her voice taking on a theatrical note of concern that fooled no one. "The one that should have been torn down years ago. They are saying Brent found you there, nearly dead from the look of things, and brought you here like a lost puppy he found on the side of the road." Amanda met her eyes directly. "I was not lost. I knew exactly where I was." "Did you now?" Martha tilted her head, a mockery of curiosity. "And where was that? Dying in a ruin? Waiting for the roof to fall on your head? Hoping someone would come along and take pity on you?" The words were calculated to wound, and they did. Amanda felt them land like stones thrown at a window, each one cracking something inside her. But she held her ground. She had faced worse than this woman. She had faced death itself and refused to blink. "Why are you here?" Amanda asked. Her voice was steady, calmer than she felt. Martha adjusted her gloves with elaborate care, pulling at each finger like she was performing for an audience. "I wanted to see for myself. Wanted to see what kind of woman would move into a single man's house, a lawman's house no less, without so much as a wedding ring on her finger, without so much as a chaperone or a relative or anyone to make it proper." "I have a ring," Amanda said quietly. She looked down at her left hand, at the simple gold band Daniel had placed there on their wedding day. "My husband gave it to me 2 years ago. He died last winter. And what I do now, where I live, who helps me when I need it, that is none of your concern." For just a moment, something flickered in Martha's eyes. Something that might have been recognition, or sympathy, or simply surprise that Amanda had pushed back at all. But it passed quickly, replaced by the same cold superiority she had worn from the start. "Everything in this town is my concern," Martha said. Her voice was harder now, the pretense of pleasantry stripped away. "I know everyone and everything. I know what people whisper when they think no one is listening. I know which families have money and which ones only pretend to. I know which men drink too much and which women smile too much at men who are not their husbands." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Amanda's face. "And I know that Brent Walker has made enemies by bringing you here. People talk. They always talk. And talk can be dangerous in a place like this. Careers can be ruined. Reputations can be destroyed. Lives can be made very, very difficult." "Then let them talk," Amanda said. "I am not afraid of words." Martha laughed. The sound was brittle, like ice cracking on a pond. "You should be," she said. "You should be very afraid. Because when this town decides you have worn out your welcome, there will be nowhere else for you to go. No other cabin to crawl into. No other man to take you in. You will be alone, truly alone, and that is when you will realize just how little your pride is worth." She picked up the reins and clucked to her horse. The wagon started moving, wheels crunching on the dry road. "Think about that," Martha called back over her shoulder as she drove away. Think about what happens when even a lawman cannot protect you. Then she was gone. The dust settled slowly behind her. The silence returned, heavier than before. Amanda stood very still for a long time, the wet shirt still clutched in her hands, the sun beating down on her uncovered head. Her heart was pounding. Her throat was tight, and the fear she thought she had left behind in her ruined cabin was crawling back up from wherever she had buried it. When Brent came home that evening, she told him everything. She did not soften it, did not minimize it, did not pretend it was less than it was. She laid out every word Martha had said and let them sit on the table between them like broken glass. Brent listened without interruption. When she finished, his jaw was tight, but his voice was calm. Martha Collins has been making trouble in this town for 15 years, he said, slowly. Her husband has money. Old money, the kind that thinks it buys the right to decide who belongs here and who does not. She has run people out of town before. Good people. Decent people who made the mistake of not bowing low enough when she passed. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. She is right about one thing, he continued. People will talk. They are already talking. I heard some of it in town today. Whispers behind hands. Looks that meant more than they said. He turned back to face her. But talk does not change what is true. You are here because you needed a place to be safe. That is all anyone needs to know. And if they want to make something ugly out of something decent, that is their failing, not ours. Amanda wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that his certainty was enough to shield them both from whatever storm Martha was trying to stir up. But she had lived long enough to know that certainty could crack under enough pressure. And when it did, the people standing too close got cut by the pieces. That night, she lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. She thought about Martha's words, about the cruelty behind them, about the truth hidden inside the cruelty like a knife wrapped in silk. She was an outsider here, a widow with nothing, a woman living in a single man's house without the protection of marriage or family or anything that would make her presence acceptable in the eyes of the respectable citizens of this town. In their eyes, she was already guilty, already condemned, and no amount of good behavior would change that verdict. The question was simple. What was she going to do about it? She could leave, pack her bundle, and walk away before things got worse. Find another town, another place, another life. Start over somewhere no one knew her name or her history or her shame. Or she could stay. Face the whispers, weather the judgment, stand her ground and see what happened when a woman who had already lost everything decided she had nothing left to fear. The answer came to her just before dawn, when the sky was turning gray and the first birds were starting to sing. She would stay. Not because it was safe, not because it was smart, but because leaving felt too much like surrender. And she had surrendered enough already to last her a lifetime. When she came out of her room that morning, Brent was already at the table with his coffee. He looked up when she appeared, his face carefully neutral. Still here, he observed. Still here, she agreed. Something passed between them then. Not words, not promises, just a quiet understanding that they were in this together, whatever this turned out to be. And for the first time since Martha's visit, Amanda felt the fear loosen its grip on her heart. 2 more weeks passed, and with each day, Amanda felt herself settling deeper into the rhythm of Brent's house. She learned which floorboards creaked and which stayed silent. She learned which window stuck in its frame and needed a firm push to open. She learned that Brent took his coffee, black and strong, that he preferred silence to conversation in the mornings, and that he carried his responsibilities heavier than most men could bear. She learned other things too, small things. The way he paused before speaking, choosing his words with the same care he used when mending a fence or cleaning his rifle. The way he checked the locks and windows every night before retiring, not from fear but from habit. The ingrained behavior of a man who had spent his life being vigilant. The way he watched her when he thought she was not looking, measuring her color, gauging her strength, noting every small improvement in her health. He was careful with her, not gentle exactly. Gentleness would have felt like pity, and she had made it clear from the start that pity was the one thing she would not accept. But he was careful. He gave her space without abandoning her in it. He gave her work without demanding gratitude. He gave her a place in his house without asking her to earn it. It was more than she had expected, more than she had allowed herself to hope for, and it frightened her in ways she did not want to examine too closely. One afternoon, a boy arrived with a message from town. He was maybe 12 years old, skinny and sunbrowned, with a face full of freckles and eyes full of curiosity. He stood at the fence with his hat twisting nervously in his hands, looking back and forth between Brent and Amanda like he expected one of them to explode. Brent walked out to meet him. Amanda watched from the porch, close enough to see the exchange, but too far to hear the words. The boy handed over a folded piece of paper. Brent read it, his face going very still. Then he thanked the boy, pressed a coin into his palm, and sent him on his way. He did not come back to the house immediately. He stood by the fence for several long minutes, the paper in his hand, his eyes on the road where the boy had disappeared. Even from a distance, Amanda could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. When he finally walked back to the porch, she was waiting. "What does it say?" she asked. Brent folded the paper once, twice. He looked at it like he was trying to decide what to do with it. "Nothing that concerns you," he said. She could tell from his voice that it was not the truth. The truth was written in every line of his body, in the way he held the paper, in the way he would not meet her eyes. But she did not press, not then. Some battles were better fought with patience than with force. That evening, she saw him standing by the stove. The paper was in his hand, and then it was in the fire, the flames consuming it eagerly, turning words she would never read into ash and smoke. She watched from the doorway as he stared at the fire, his face lit by the flickering orange light. He looked older in that moment, wearier, like a man carrying a burden he could not set down. A boundary had been drawn, she realized, not against her, around her. He was protecting her from something, keeping her safe by keeping her ignorant. She was not sure how she felt about that. She lay awake that night, turning the moment over in her mind like a stone in her palm. What was on that paper? Who had sent it? And why did Brent think she should not know? The questions followed her into sleep and back out again. By morning, she had decided that patience had limits, and hers had been reached. She found him at the fence, repairing a rail that had split during a recent storm. The sun was already warm, promising another hot day. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of physical work. His hands moved with the same practiced efficiency she had come to associate with everything he did. "The paper," she said without preamble. "Tell me what it said." He did not stop working. His hammer rose and fell, driving a nail into the fresh wood with 3 precise strikes. "Why?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Because I deserve to know. Because I am part of this now, whether either of us planned for it or not. Because keeping secrets from me does not protect me. It just makes me less prepared for whatever is coming." The hammer paused mid-swing. Brent set it down carefully and stood, turning to face her. He wiped his hands on his trousers, leaving dark streaks of sawdust on the worn fabric. "It was a complaint," he said, "filed with the county. Someone is claiming I am harboring you improperly, that your presence here damages my reputation and the reputation of the badge I wear." Amanda felt the words land like physical blows. Each one left a bruise she could not see but felt all too clearly. "Who filed it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He met her eyes. "Martha Collins. Her husband signed it, but she wrote every word. I know her handwriting. I have seen it before." Amanda thought of the woman in the wagon, the cold smile, the cruel words, the casual malice of someone who had never been truly hurt and could not imagine what it felt like. "What happens now?" she asked. Brent shrugged, but his shoulders were tight. "Now I respond. I explain that you are a widow in need of shelter, and that providing shelter is not a crime. The complaint will go nowhere because there is nothing illegal about kindness, nothing illegal about doing the right thing. But there will be more complaints. Probably. And more trouble. Likely." She looked at the house, at the fence, at the road that led away from all of this, back to a world that did not want her, had never wanted her. "I should leave," she said quietly. "I should go before this gets worse, before I cost you more than I am worth." Brent was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the wind moving through the grass and the distant call of a bird she could not see. Then he said, "That is your choice. It has always been your choice. You are free to go whenever you want, wherever you want. But leaving because someone like Martha Collins wants you gone is not the same as leaving because you want to go. What is the difference? He picked up his hammer and turned back to the fence. One is freedom. The other is surrender. Amanda stood there watching him work, feeling the weight of everything she had not said pressing against her chest like a stone. She thought of the cabin, of the door that had fallen, of the night she had spent alone in that broken place, wondering if anyone in the world would notice when she finally stopped breathing. She thought of this house, of the bed that felt like hers now, of the meals she shared with a man who expected nothing from her but her presence, of the peace she had found in a place she had never expected to find anything. And she thought of Martha Collins, of the spite behind her smile, of the satisfaction she would feel if Amanda turned tail and ran. No, Amanda said finally. Brent paused. No, she repeated, her voice stronger now. I am not leaving. Not because of her. Not because of anyone who thinks they can drive me out with threats and whispers and pieces of paper. He turned his head and looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that might have been approval or admiration or something else entirely. Then stay, he said simply. And she did. The days that followed were harder. Riders slowed when they passed the house, their curiosity sharp and undisguised. Women in town turned away when Amanda walked by on the rare occasions she accompanied Brent for supplies. Whispers followed her like shadows, always just out of earshot, never quite caught, but always felt. But Brent adjusted without announcement. He took on more of the outside tasks himself, remaining visible from the road, letting people see him, letting them know he was there. He positioned himself where he could be seen, a quiet declaration that Amanda was under his protection. And slowly, gradually, the whispers began to lose some of their power. Not because they stopped. They did not. But because Amanda stopped listening to them. She had survived worse than gossip. She had survived worse than Martha Collins. And she would keep surviving, no matter what anyone said or did or tried to do. That was the only victory that mattered. The storm came without warning on a Thursday evening, rolling in from the west like an invading army. One moment the sky was clear, painted with the soft colors of approaching sunset. The next, clouds had swallowed the horizon, dark and heavy and churning with violence. Amanda was in the kitchen when the first thunder cracked across the sky. The sound was so sudden, so loud that she dropped the ladle she was holding and grabbed the edge of the table with both hands, her heart slamming against her ribs. She had always hated storms. Ever since she was a small child, when her father would hold her on his lap and tell her the thunder was just angels moving furniture around heaven. She had never believed him, but the lie had been comforting in its own way. Now, with no one to hold her, with no one to tell her pretty lies, the fear was raw and unfiltered. The second crack of thunder came louder than the first, closer, like the sky was tearing itself apart directly overhead. The windows rattled in their frames, the walls seemed to shake, and somewhere outside, the wind began to howl. Brent appeared in the doorway, his face calm but his eyes alert. He had been outside when the storm rolled in, securing the barn and checking on the animals. It will pass, he said. His voice was steady, matter of fact. Just a summer storm. We have them all the time out here. Amanda nodded, but she did not release her grip on the table. Her knuckles were white. Her breath was coming too fast. The rain started then, not in gentle drops, but in sheets of water that hammered the roof like fists. It poured down the windows in rivers, turning the world outside into a gray blur. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that shook the house to its foundations. Amanda backed into the corner of the kitchen and pressed herself against the wall. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. And the memories were coming, flooding back like the rain outside, impossible to stop. She remembered another storm, the one that had come the night Daniel died. The fever had taken him at midnight, right as the wind was tearing at the cabin walls and the rain was pounding the roof and the world was falling apart around her. She had held his hand as it grew cold, had sat with him for hours, listening to his breath grow slower and shallower, until finally it stopped altogether. Had stayed with his body until dawn, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but hold on to him, even though he was already gone. She had buried him 2 days later in mud that sucked at her boots with every step. The grave had filled with water before she could finish filling it with dirt. She had stood there in the rain, soaked to the bone, watching the dark water seep into the earth that held her husband, and she had screamed until her voice gave out. Now the memories were rising, threatening to pull her under. The storm outside was a storm inside, and she did not know how to escape either one. She did not realize she had sunk to the floor until Brent was kneeling beside her, his face level with hers, his voice cutting through the thunder. "Amanda," he said, her name on his lips, steady and clear, anchoring. "You are safe. The house will hold. I built it to hold." She looked at him through eyes blurred with tears she had not realized she was crying. "How do you know?" "Because I built it myself," he said. "Every beam, every nail, I built it to last. And because I am here and I am not going anywhere." The words reached through the panic, wrapped around the part of her that was breaking, and held it together just barely, just enough. She did not know how long they stayed like that. The storm raged outside, thunder crashing, lightning flashing, rain hammering the windows. But inside the house there was only the sound of her ragged breathing gradually slowing, and Brent's voice low and even, telling her things that did not matter. He talked about the house, how he had chosen this spot because of the way the land sloped, directing water away from the foundation, how he had dug the well himself, finding clean water just 18 feet down, how he had made mistakes in the building, boards cut wrong, nails bent, plans that had to be abandoned and remade. He talked about the town, about the people who lived there, the good ones and the bad ones, about the sheriff he had worked under when he first got his badge, a man who had taught him that the law was not just about punishment, but about protection, about the cases he had solved and the ones that still haunted him. He talked about nothing important and everything important, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. By the time the storm began to ease, Amanda had stopped shaking. Her hands were still cold, her heart was still racing, but the panic had retreated to a place where she could manage it. Brent stood and offered her his hand. "Come," he said, "I will make tea." She let him pull her up, let him lead her to the table, let him press a warm cup into her cold hands. The tea was hot and bitter, but she drank it anyway. The warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the last of the cold. "I should apologize," she said when she could trust her voice again. "For what? For being weak? For falling apart? For making you deal with me?" Brent set down his cup and looked at her directly. "You are not weak," he said. "You have survived things that would have broken most people. You are still here, still fighting, still getting up every morning when staying in bed would be so much easier. That is not weakness," she wanted to argue. Wanted to list all the ways she had failed, all the times she had wanted to give up, all the moments when letting go would have been easier than holding on. But something in his voice made her pause. Something in his eyes made her believe him. Just a little. Just enough. They sat in silence as the storm moved away into the distance. The thunder grew softer. The lightning faded. The rain slowed to a gentle patter on the roof. When Amanda finally stood to go to her room, she paused at the doorway. "Thank you," she said. Brent looked up from his cup. "For what?" "For not leaving, for staying with me, for talking me through it." He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that said more than any words could have. That night, Amanda slept deeper than she had in months. No dreams of storms, no memories of death, no fear of what the morning might bring. Just rest. Deep, healing, much-needed rest. And when she woke the next morning, the sun was shining and the air smelled clean, and the house was still standing, solid and straight and safe. She lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside her. She had been running for so long. Running from grief, running from fear, running from the memory of everything she had lost. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to stay. Summer ripened into something golden and full, the days stretching long and warm, the nights growing soft and sweet. The land around Brent's house burst into life, wildflowers blooming in the fields, birds singing in the trees, the whole world celebrating the season of growth and plenty. And somewhere in the midst of all that beauty, something else began to grow. Something neither Amanda nor Brent had planned for. Something neither of them quite knew how to name. Amanda noticed it first in small moments that seemed to mean nothing and everything at once. The way Brent's hand lingered when he passed her a cup of coffee in the morning, his fingers brushing hers for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. The way his eyes followed her when she moved through the house, tracking her progress with an attention that felt like warmth on her skin. The way he seemed to find reasons to be near her, working on projects close to the house instead of riding out to check the far fences, asking her opinion on matters he surely knew the answers to. She noticed it in herself too, and that frightened her more than anything. The flutter in her chest when she heard his boots on the porch in the evening, the warmth that spread through her belly when he smiled, which he did rarely and only when something genuinely pleased him. The way she caught herself listening for his voice, watching for his return, counting the hours until he walked through the door. It was dangerous, this feeling growing between them. She knew that better than anyone. She had loved once before, had given her whole heart to Daniel, and love had left her alone in a broken cabin with a dead husband and nothing but grief to keep her company. But knowing something was dangerous did not make it stop, did not even slow it down. One afternoon they were mending the back fence together. The sun was high and hot, beating down on them without mercy. Sweat darkened the collar of Brent's shirt and made his hair curl slightly at the temples. Amanda worked beside him, handing him nails when he needed them, holding boards steady while he hammered them into place. Their hands touched when she passed him the hammer. The contact was brief, accidental, meant nothing, but neither of them pulled away. Amanda felt the touch echo through her like a bell struck in an empty church. She looked up and found Brent watching her, his eyes darker than usual, his expression unreadable. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. The air seemed to thicken. The world seemed to narrow until there was nothing but the two of them standing in the afternoon sun, connected by a touch that should have meant nothing but somehow meant everything. Then Brent cleared his throat and turned back to the fence. Amanda did the same, her heart racing, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up another nail. Something had changed. Something had shifted between them that could not be shifted back. The question was what either of them was going to do about it. That night, she sat on the porch and watched the stars come out one by one. The air was soft and cool after the heat of the day. Crickets sang their endless summer songs in the tall grass. The world felt peaceful in a way it had not felt in a very long time. Brent came out and sat beside her, not too close, but closer than before. Close enough that she could smell the soap he used, clean and simple. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Why did you become a lawman?" she asked. The question had been building inside her for weeks, and it seemed like the right time to finally let it out. He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. Then he said, "Because order came easier to me than mercy. Because I thought if I could bring order to other people's lives, maybe I would find some in my own." "And did you find it?" He shook his head slowly. "No. Order is not the same as peace. I learned that the hard way. I spent years enforcing the law without understanding what the law was for. I punished people who broke the rules without asking why they broke them in the first place. I was good at my job, but I was not good at being human." He paused, his eyes on the darkening horizon. "I made mistakes," he continued, "when I was younger, before I understood better. I was too hard, too rigid. I saw everything in black and white when most of life lives in the gray. I hurt people who did not deserve to be hurt. I failed people who needed more than I was willing to give." Amanda waited. She could feel there was more. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because you should know who I am. Not just the badge, not just the house. The man underneath, the flawed one, the one who is still trying to figure out how to be better than he was." She held his gaze. "We are all flawed, some more than others, and some less than they think." He almost smiled then. The expression changed his face, softened it, made him look younger and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "You are good at that," he said. "At what?" "At seeing past the surface. At finding the good in people who have stopped looking for it in themselves." Amanda felt something bloom in her chest, warm and bright. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be seen only for what is broken, to be judged for your worst moments instead of your best ones." They sat in silence for a while longer, the stars wheeling slowly overhead, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. When Amanda finally stood to go inside, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." "Thank you for listening," he replied. She went to her room and closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating fast. Something was happening, something she had not planned for, something she was not sure she could stop. And for the first time, she was not sure she wanted to. The change came on a Sunday morning when the light was golden and the air was sweet and the world seemed balanced on the edge of something profound. Amanda woke early, as she always did, but this morning there was a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with illness. She lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of all the things she had not said pressing down on her like stones. Today felt different. Today felt like a door that was about to open or close, and she needed to decide which side she wanted to be on. She dressed with unusual care, choosing the better of her two dresses, the one that still held some of its original color. She smoothed her hair and pinched her cheeks to bring out some color, feeling foolish and hopeful and terrified all at once. When she emerged from her room, she found Brent at the table. But he was not eating, he was not reading, he was just sitting there, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he had not touched, his face tight with something he was trying to hide. "What is wrong?" Amanda asked. He looked up. "Nothing, Brent." Her voice was firmer this time, brooking no argument. He heard the steel in it and his shoulders dropped. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." Amanda sat down across from him. Her hands were cold. Her heart was pounding. "The complaint from Martha Collins," he began. "It was not the only one. There have been others. People in town have been saying things. About me, about you, about what they think is happening in this house." Amanda nodded. She had suspected as much. "The county sent a letter last week," Brent continued. "They are sending someone to investigate. An official. Someone to make sure I am not misusing my position. To make sure you are not being held here against your will. To determine whether my conduct is appropriate for a man wearing this badge." The words hit her like physical blows. She felt each one land, felt the bruises forming beneath her skin. "When?" she asked. "Next week. Maybe sooner." She absorbed this, turned it over in her mind. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "What do you want me to do?" Brent was silent for a long moment. He stared at his coffee, at the table, at his own hands. Then he looked up and met her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because you feel obligated, but because I want you here. Because this house is better with you in it. Because I am better with you in it." He paused, took a breath, plunged ahead. "I have spent 5 years in this house alone," he continued. "I told myself that was what I wanted, that I was better off without anyone, that being alone was safer than caring about someone and losing them. But then you came, and everything changed." Amanda felt tears prick at the backs of her eyes. She blinked them back. "Brent," she started. "Wait," he held up his hand. "Let me finish. I know this is not what you expected when you came here. I know you came looking for shelter, not for this. And if you want to leave, I will not stop you. I will help you find another place. I will make sure you are safe. I will do whatever you need me to do. But I could not let another day pass without telling you the truth." He stopped. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything he had said and everything she had not. Amanda looked at this man sitting across from her. This lawman with his rigid sense of duty and his careful words and his heart that he guarded like a fortress. She looked at his hands, scarred from years of hard work. At his eyes, tired but honest. At the lines around his mouth that deepened when he was worried. And she made her choice. "I do not want to leave," she said. The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to see. "You do not have to say anything else," he said quickly. "You do not have to make any promises. Just knowing you want to stay is enough." Amanda reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were warm and rough and strong. They wrapped around hers like they belonged there. "I am not saying this because I have nowhere else to go," she said carefully, wanting him to understand. "I am saying this because, as somewhere in the past few weeks, this house stopped being shelter and started being home. And you stopped being the man who saved me, and started being the man I want to see every morning when I wake up. She paused, gathered her courage for the words she had never expected to say again. I love you, Brent. I did not plan to. I did not think I ever could again. Not after Daniel. But I do. And I am tired of pretending I do not. The words hung in the air, fragile, brave, true. Brent turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. I love you too, he said. His voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. I have loved you since the day I saw you standing in front of that broken door, too stubborn to admit it had beaten you, too proud to give up, too strong to fall. Amanda laughed, the sound wet with tears she was no longer trying to hold back. The door fell anyway, she said. He smiled, really smiled, and the expression transformed his face. But you did not. They sat there for a long time, hands clasped across the table, hearts full of something that felt like hope. And when the investigator came the following week, he found exactly what Brent had promised. Two people who had found each other in the midst of hardship and chosen to face whatever came next together. He found a home. The investigation lasted 3 days. A man named Samuel Price arrived from the county office on a Monday morning, riding a gray horse that looked as tired and dusty as its rider. He carried a leather satchel full of papers and a face that suggested he had already formed his opinions and was simply going through the motions of confirming them. Martha Collins met him at the edge of town. Amanda saw them from the window, two figures on horseback, heads bent close together in conversation. She watched Martha's hands moving, her mouth shaping words that Amanda could not hear, but could easily imagine. Poison. That was what Martha was pouring into the investigator's ears, poison wrapped in the language of concern and propriety. But Amanda did not hide. She did not flee to her room or pretend to be busy with tasks that would keep her out of sight. She walked onto the porch and stood there in full view, watching them approach, refusing to be ashamed of anything. When Price reached the house, he dismounted and looked at her with the kind of scrutiny designed to make people squirm. His eyes moved over her worn dress, her work-roughened hands, her face that still showed traces of the illness that had nearly killed her. Amanda looked back, steady and calm. She had nothing to hide, and she was done being afraid. The questions came fast, one after another, barely giving her time to answer before the next one arrived. How had she come to be here? What was her relationship with the lawman? Did she feel pressured or coerced? Was she here of her own free will? Did she understand how her presence in this house might be perceived by the community? Amanda answered each question honestly and completely. She told Price about the cabin and how it had fallen apart around her. She told him about Daniel and the fever that had taken him. She told him about the sickness that had nearly finished what grief had started. She told him about Brent's offer and her initial refusal and her eventual acceptance when staying in the cabin meant certain death. She did not mention love. That was private. That was hers. Price wrote everything down in a small notebook, his pen scratching across the paper with irritating persistence. Then he turned his attention to Brent. The questions for the lawman were harder, more pointed. Price asked about duty and boundaries and the appearance of impropriety. He asked whether Brent had ever made inappropriate advances, whether he had used his position to pressure her, whether he had demanded anything in exchange for his help. Brent answered with the same directness he brought to everything. Yes, Amanda lived in his house. No, nothing improper had occurred. Yes, he cared about her welfare. No, he had not abused his authority or his badge. Price looked skeptical. He looked at the house, at Amanda, at Brent. I will need to speak with others in town, he said finally, to corroborate your account. Amanda felt her stomach tighten. She knew what others in town would say. Martha had spent weeks making sure of that, spreading rumors and insinuations like seeds in fertile soil. But Brent just nodded calmly. Do what you need to do. The truth does not change based on how many people choose to deny it. The next 2 days were agony. Amanda watched from the house as Price rode into town, as he visited the general store and the church and the homes of the respectable citizens whose opinions supposedly mattered. She saw him talking to Martha again, saw the satisfied smile on Martha's face, saw the way she gestured toward Brent's property like she was pointing out evidence of a crime. She wanted to scream, wanted to ride into town herself and defend her honor, her choices, her life. wanted to grab Martha Collins by the shoulders and shake her until her teeth rattled. But she did not. She stayed. She waited. She trusted. On the third day, Price returned. Amanda and Brent met him on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cool and still, as if the whole world was holding its breath. "I have completed my investigation," Price said. His face was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Amanda felt Brent's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. A small touch, a quiet reassurance. Price opened his notebook and consulted his notes, though Amanda suspected he already knew what he was going to say. "I've found no evidence of wrongdoing," he announced. "No evidence of coercion or impropriety. No evidence that Mr. Walker has violated the duties of his office or taken advantage of his position." He looked at Amanda directly. "What I found was a widow who was given shelter by a man who takes his responsibilities seriously. I also found a woman who could have taken the easy path, who could have confirmed every ugly rumor by running away when the gossip started. But she did not. She stayed." He closed his notebook with a snap. "The complaint is dismissed," he said. "Mrs. Collins will be informed that her accusations were unfounded. I trust there will be no further issues." Then he tipped his hat, mounted his tired gray horse, and rode away without looking back. Amanda stood very still, hardly daring to believe it was over. Brent squeezed her hand gently. "You see," he said softly, "the truth does not change." She turned to look at him, at this man who had stood beside her through everything, who had never wavered, never doubted. "No," she said, "it does not." They went inside together. The door closed behind them with a solid, satisfying sound, the sound of something that held, the sound of home. And somewhere in town, Martha Collins received news that turned her face white with rage. But Amanda did not care. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The wedding took place on a crisp autumn day when the leaves were turning gold and crimson, and the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at it. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of people who had proven their friendship through the difficult months, a minister from a neighboring town who did not know or care about the gossip, and the endless expanse of land that had witnessed so many endings and beginnings over the years. Amanda wore a dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully let out at the seams to fit her healthier frame. The fabric was old but beautiful, soft cream cotton with delicate lace at the collar that had been sewn by her grandmother's hands decades ago. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the fields around the house, simple and colorful and perfect. When she walked to where Brent waited, she did not shake, did not falter, did not doubt. She had spent months learning how to trust again, learning how to hope, learning how to love without waiting for that love to be taken away. Now she was ready for whatever came next. The vows were simple and traditional, words that countless couples had spoken before them, words that would be spoken by countless couples yet to come. But when Amanda said "I do," she meant it with every fiber of her being. And when Brent slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady, and his eyes were bright, and his voice was thick with emotion he did not try to hide. Afterward, they stood on the porch of the house that had become their home. The few guests had departed. The day was fading into evening. The world was quiet and peaceful. Amanda leaned against her husband and looked out at the land that stretched away in every direction. "Do you remember the first time you came to my cabin?" she asked. Brent nodded. His arm was around her shoulders, warm and solid. "You told me that charity did not suit you." She smiled at the memory. "I was wrong. No." He turned his head to look at her. "You were scared, and you had every right to be. The world had not given you any reason to trust kindness." She considered this, maybe. "But I was also stubborn, too stubborn to see what you were really offering." "And what was that?" Amanda met his eyes. Not charity, not duty, not obligation, just a door. "A door that you held open for me until I was ready to walk through it." Brent pulled her closer. "And now you have walked through it." Eventually she agreed. "It took me a while. That is all that matters. That you got here in the end." They stood together as the sun set, as the stars began to appear one by one as the night wrapped around them with gentle hands. Amanda thought about the cabin she had left behind, about the door that had fallen, about all the nights she had spent alone in that broken place, wondering if anyone in the world cared whether she lived or died. She thought about Martha Collins, who had tried so hard to destroy her and had failed so completely. About Samuel Price, who had looked past the gossip and rumors to find the truth underneath. About all the people who had whispered and judged and assumed the worst, and how wrong they had been. She thought about Daniel, about the love they had shared, about the grief that had nearly drowned her. She would always carry him with her, always remember what they had meant to each other. But she no longer carried him alone, and she knew somehow that he would have wanted this for her, would have wanted her to find happiness again. I used to think love was something you had to earn, she said softly, something you had to prove yourself worthy of. What do you think now? Now I think love is something you accept, like sunlight, like rain, like the ground beneath your feet. You do not earn it. You just open yourself to it and let it in. Brent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are wiser than me." She laughed softly. "No, just older. By 2 years. A lifetime," she corrected, smiling. They went inside as the stars filled the sky. The door closed behind them with the same solid sound it always made. The sound of something built to last. The sound of something that held. Amanda looked around the house that was now truly hers. At the table where they shared meals. At the stove where she cooked. At the chair where Brent sat in the evenings, reading reports or simply watching her move through the rooms. This was her life now. Not the life she had planned, not the life she had expected, but the life she had chosen, the life she had fought for, the life she had earned through all the dark nights and difficult choices and moments of doubt. And it was good. She turned to Brent. "I love you," she said. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face the way it always did, making him look younger and softer and more human. "I love you too," he said. And in that house built by careful hands, on that land that had witnessed 1,000 stories unfold, they began the rest of their lives together. The door had fallen once, but it had led them here, to this place, to this moment, to this love, and that was everything.